War has never been just about steel and blood, it is a symphony of power, deception, and brutality, where the victors carve their names into history with the weapons of their time. Across the ancient world, civilizations did not merely fight, they engineered terror tactics, turning the battlefield into a ruthless arena of strategy and slaughter. These tactics were not mere skirmishes, they were exhibitions of calculated savagery designed to annihilate. The deathly silence of the ancient Roman legions. War is chaos, screams, clashing steel, and the deafening roar of battle. But the Roman legions knew a deadlier sound, absolute silence. Imagine standing on the battlefield, expecting a thunderous war cry from your enemy, only to be met with an eerie, disciplined advance, thousands of men marching in perfect sync, shields locked, faces emotionless, an impenetrable machine of war. This was the Romans' psychological weapon, silence. It was not hesitation, it was calculated terror. Enemy warriors, accustomed to frenzied shouts and reckless charges, would hesitate, their instincts betrayed by the unnatural calm of the advancing legion. By the time they gathered their courage, it was already too late. This discipline translated into their legendary testudo, or tortoise formation, a wall of shields, impenetrable to arrows, slings, and even siege weapons. Used in sieges and open battles alike, it allowed the Romans to advance under constant attack, unyielding, relentless. But silence was not just a formation, it was a deception. Julius Caesar, during the Battle of Alesia, feigned weakness, allowing the Gauls to believe his forces were breaking. Then, with chilling precision, his men closed in from all sides, trapping Vercingetorix in an inescapable noose. The silence of the Roman legions was not just a strategy, it was a promise of death. The unstoppable war elephants of the Maurya Empire. The ground trembles before the battle even begins. Dust rises in thick clouds, the scent of earth and sweat mingling with the stench of fear. Then, out of the haze, they appear, colossal beasts clad in armor, their tusks sharpened to deadly points, their riders guiding them like living war machines. This was the sheer terror of the war elephants of the Maurya Empire, a force so overwhelming that no ordinary soldier could stand against it. Chandragupta Maurya, the empire's founder, wielded these behemoths not just as weapons, but as instruments of psychological destruction. The sight alone could shatter enemy morale, turning hardened warriors into fleeing men before the first strike. But these creatures were not simply thrown into battle. They were trained with precision, their discipline rivaling that of human armies. The Arthashastra, written by Kautilya, Chandragupta's chief advisor, meticulously documented their care, from diet to battlefield tactics. War elephants were conditioned to charge straight into enemy lines, trampling soldiers, scattering cavalry, and breaking formations with sheer force. At the Battle of Hydaspes, King Porus of India used them masterfully against Alexander the Great, creating a living fortress that resisted the Macedonian phalanx. Though Alexander prevailed, his men never forgot the horror of facing an enemy that neither shield nor sword could stop. In the end, the true power of the Mauryan war elephant was not just its size or strength, but its ability to turn the tide of history with a single, earth-shaking charge. The bloodthirsty charge of the Viking Berserkers. There was no formation, no strategy, only pure, unrelenting fury. The Viking Berserkers did not march like disciplined legions or trample enemies under towering beasts. They stormed the battlefield like a force of nature, howling, foaming at the mouth, their eyes vacant with an inhuman rage. Clad in animal pelts, bearskins for the berserker, wolf hides for the Ulfhedner, they seemed more beast than man. They did not fear death, they invited it, charging headlong into enemy lines with reckless abandon, wielding axes and swords with terrifying strength. For those standing against them, there was no time for courage, only survival. But this battle madness was not without preparation. Before combat, berserkers engaged in ritualistic rites, believed to involve chants, drumbeats, and possibly hallucinogenic substances that unleashed their bloodlust. Some sources suggest they consumed fly agaric mushrooms or alcohol mixed with henbane, fueling their trance-like state where pain became meaningless and exhaustion ceased to exist. This was not just combat, it was a transformation. The Ulfhedner, the wolf warriors, fought with no armor, moving faster than any shielded foe, breaking formations through sheer ferocity. To fight a berserker was to face an opponent who could not be reasoned with, who could not be intimidated. Their charge was not merely an attack, it was an onslaught, a storm of blood and steel that left nothing but terror in its wake. The ruthless siege tactics of the Assyrian Empire. There was no mercy when the Assyrians laid siege. Their war machine did not simply conquer, it annihilated. Force, their methodical cruelty unfolded like a slow, inescapable nightmare. Cities fortified by towering walls, once thought impregnable, became death traps as the Assyrians approached with ruthless efficiency. They engineered colossal siege towers, battering rams reinforced with iron, and massive scaling ladders, ensuring no fortress could stand against them. But their true weapon was terror. Surrender was often the only way to avoid the inevitable slaughter that awaited those who resisted. The Assyrians were pioneers of psychological warfare, using sheer brutality to break enemy morale before a single stone was thrown. Prisoners were impaled outside city walls, their screams a warning to those still inside. Others were flayed alive, their skins stretched across gates as a grotesque promise of what was to come. These were not acts of mindless savagery, they were calculated, designed to spread fear so that future cities would submit without a fight. But when resistance was met, the Assyrians deployed devastating strategies, tunneling beneath walls to collapse defenses, flooding enemy strongholds with fire and poison water supplies, and using massive shields to cover sappers as they worked. No empire before them had weaponized fear and innovation so effectively. Their sieges were not simply battles, they were statements. When the Assyrians came, survival was a privilege, not a right. The invincible shield wall of the Anglo-Saxons. It was not brute force or reckless aggression that defined the Anglo-Saxon way of war, it was discipline, unity, and an unbreakable wall of steel. When their warriors took the field, they did not rush forward in chaotic charges or scatter like undisciplined rabble. Instead, they formed an impenetrable barrier, shoulder to shoulder, shields locked so tightly that they became a single living fortress. The Seilbur or shield wall was not just a formation, it was survival itself. Against it, cavalry charges faltered, arrows splintered, and enemy infantry crashed like waves against an immovable cliff. But strength alone did not hold the line. It was coordination, drilled into warriors from youth. Each man understood his place, relying on the shields beside him as much as his own weapon. The front ranks bore the brunt of the assault, their shields absorbing impact after impact, while those behind them thrust spears through the gaps, striking down enemies who dared to approach. The battle was not won by individual heroics but by endurance, as fatigue and fear broke enemy formations long before the wall did. And when the moment was right, the Anglo-Saxons would surge forward, using the sheer weight of their locked shields to push back their foes, turning defense into unstoppable momentum. To break the shield wall was to break the army itself, but as history proved, that was easier said than done. The deadly horse archers of the Mongol hordes. Speed was their weapon. Precision was their death stroke. The Mongol horse archers did not rely on towering walls or heavy armor. They fought like ghosts, appearing and vanishing before their enemies could react. To face them was to battle the wind itself. They struck from a distance, their composite bows unleashing a storm of arrows with deadly accuracy, each shot fired from the saddle at full gallop. Unlike clumsy cavalry weighed down by plate and steel, the Mongols moved like shadows across the battlefield, their tactics honed by generations of warfare on the vast Eurasian steppes. At the Battle of Kalkar River, they baited the Kievan Rus into a disastrous chase, only to encircle and annihilate. The Mongols did not fight fair, nor did they fight by the rules of others. They fought on their terms, and by the time their enemies realized it, the battle was already lost. War is the ultimate test of human ingenuity and brutality. Throughout history, the battlefield has been a stage where civilizations either ascended to dominance or crumbled into dust. The most ruthless tactics were not born from sheer violence but from strategy, discipline, and an understanding of fear itself. These methods were not just tools of war, they were instruments that shaped empires, redefined power, and left scars that history still remembers. The echoes of these ancient battles linger in the very foundations of the modern world, reminding us that warfare is not merely destruction, it is transformation. As Thucydides once wrote, "The strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must."